Aloha and welcome. I'm Phyllis with the Hawaii State Public Library System. Thank you all for joining us today from near and far for our Oceans of Possibilities Summer Reading Challenge speaker series. Today's speaker, Marc Rice, is a veteran marine science educator and director of Hawaii Preparatory Academy's renowned sea turtle research program. I had the privilege of working with Marc for 17 years at Hawaii Preparatory Academy. During that time, I accompanied Marc and his students on a number of research trips, including one to the Nagoya Aquarium in Japan. I experienced firsthand how Marc's important work and that of his students is contributing to a better understanding of sea turtle biology and ecology. Marc has taught marine science for 55 years and has been involved in sea turtle research in Hawaii and abroad for 35 years. His work with the Sea Turtle Research Program, which is celebrating its 35th anniversary this year, has provided students with unparalleled and unique learning opportunities and has taken him and his students from Waimea to many areas of the Pacific. He is a tireless advocate for students and Honu, a real student and Honu hero. Before we begin, I just want to send a shout out to George Balaz, another Honu hero and a good friend of ours who I know is out there today. George, thank you for all your support and for all you do for Honu. And now it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Marc Rice and his presentation, Sea Turtles of Hawaii and Beyond. Marc.
Thank you, Phyllis. I hope everyone can hear me okay. If not, give me a yell. Aloha, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's a wonderful day to be talking about turtles, as it is any day. The title of my presentation today is Sea Turtles of Hawaii and Beyond. This is in keeping with the Hawaii State Library's theme of Oceans of Possibilities, with subcategories or subsections of one big ocean and exploring coral reefs and tide pools. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about our Hawaiian sea turtles, and then also branch out beyond to talk a little bit about the Pacific as a whole, because even though we're very isolated in Hawaii, it's very true that we live in that one big ocean and everything we do affects everything else in the ocean. So as we begin, I would like to tell you a little bit about me. As Phyllis said, I work at the Hawaii Preparatory Academy. This is on the Big Island of Hawaii. You see here our campus, our upper campus. We have another campus, which is K8 at another location. These are on the hills of slopes of Mount Kohala on the Big Island. We have approximately 700 students, and we run a marine studies program at the middle and upper school levels. As part of that program, we have operated a sea turtle research and conservation program and a sea turtle stranding program for the last 35 years, and in cooperation with the National Marine Fisheries Service on Oahu, the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. First, I want to take a moment to recognize the person who is probably the most responsible for the success of our sea turtle research program. And I would like to dedicate this presentation to him. Phyllis mentioned him as an undying and unceasing supporter of HPA, student research, student learning, and sea turtles. So I want to show you George Balaz here. He's been an amazing mentor and facilitator for our program and our students here at the Hawaii Preparatory Academy since its inception in 1987. He has been patient, inclusive, positive, forgiving, you name it, and he continues to this day. As he has said, I have retired from NOAA nymphs, but I will never retire from turtles. Most of what we discuss today will result from our work with George when he was with the NOAA NIMS program. This picture was taken on June 1st, of 2022, when George was celebrating his 49th year since he first landed at French Frigate Shoals, East Island, to begin monitoring the index beach for nesting Honu. So at this point, you will hear more about George as today's presentation progresses. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you, George, for all you have done for all of us and for the Honu. Let's begin. First of all, I want you to know that all the work that we do is under the Stranding and Response Activities program. The Sea Turtle Research is under the direction and authority of the NOAA NIMS program, Marine Turtle Biology and Assessment. It's a NIMS permit and a U.S. Fish and Wildlife permit and a DAR permit. Okay, let's talk a little bit about turtles now. First of all, you know that turtles are reptiles. This little critter right here is a subadult green turtle or Honu that is laying on the rocks at Kiholo Bay on our island. Sea turtles, like all reptiles, have scales. They're endothermic largely, that is, they have cold blood, with the exception perhaps of the leatherback turtle, and they lay shelled eggs with external development. All of them must breathe air. They have lungs, so they must come to the surface to survive. So how many turtles do we have in Hawaii's waters? Well, there are 7 different species of turtles that live in waters of the world. 5 of those can be found in Hawaii. The green turtle or Honu, which is the most common one we'll ever see here. The hawksbill turtle, which is much more rare than the Honu, but we can find them in our nearshore waters. And then we have 3 others, the leatherback, the loggerhead, and the olive ridley turtle that can be found out in the ocean, the pelagic zone around the Hawaiian Islands and in the North and South Pacific Oceans. 2 of these turtles species.
Mark, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We're not seeing your presentation screen.
Oh, okay. Oh, Sharon. Well, goodness gracious. That was terrible. Why didn't you tell me? Sorry. Here we go. Real quick here. So you heard what I said, but basically there's a picture of our campus. Can you see that now, everyone? I hope. And yes. Here is the picture of our mentor, George, on Maui, with a lot of basking turtles in the background. I will continue along now and go past where we got to sea turtles and to the number of species. 5 turtles that are found in Hawaiian waters, 2 of them in our nearshore waters, and then 2 of them, the Kemp's Ridley, which is found only in the Atlantic Ocean, and the flatback turtle, which is found in Australia and Papua New Guinea. Okay, thank you for your patience, everyone. Sorry. So let's take a look at our turtles here in Hawaii, the Honu or green turtle. Its maximum size is somewhere in the order of 200 kilograms or over 400 pounds, although very rarely do we see that here in Hawaii. The carapace length, sometimes around 1 meter to 1.3 meters maximum, the carapace being that shell on the dorsal surface or back surface. The lifespan of the turtles here is somewhere in the 70 to 80 year range. If you look at sea turtles in general, not just Hawaii, but in general, you see that their distribution is really worldwide. You will note that some of them show very extreme areas here in the north or in the south, and those only occur when the water temperature is warm enough for them to get there at those areas. Now, if we look at the Honu a little differently in terms of regional management units, you'll see that there are groups of this species called the green turtle that rely and have similar genetic markers, and they're considered to be a single management unit. And what you notice here in the central North Pacific is that there is a single management unit there, which is the one around the Hawaiian Islands. And what we're saying here is that the Hawaiian green turtles reside in Hawaii for their entire life. They are truly Hawaiian. Yes, there is perhaps a little leakage in or out, but mostly they are here for their entire life. So let's take a look at our Honu and see what's going on there. We see mature females in our main Hawaiian Islands mostly, but throughout the archipelago, will migrate to nest every 2 to 5 years. Males probably migrate more frequently than the females. And the interesting part is that 96% of all nesting Honu travel to French frigate shoals, or the island called Lalo. Here is a picture of our archipelago from Kure Atoll in the far northwest to Hawaii Island in the far southeast. And in the middle of this is an atoll called French Frigate Shoals, or Lalo. This is where 96% of all Honu go to nest. I might also add that this area from Nihoa and this area here all the way up to Kure Atoll is also part of the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument system. And that represents nearly 1,510,000 square kilometers of ocean. There is Lalo. This is the site where the green turtles come to nest, almost all of them. Okay, so what about the life cycle, the reproductive migrations? Well, coming back to George Balaz again, this publication in 2017 highlighted work that was done on nesting females, post-nesting females, and where satellite tags were placed on these turtles prior to their post-nesting migration back to their forage grounds. And you'll see that the general trend is for the turtles to move a bit south and east and then loop down and come back to the main Hawaiian Islands. Mostly they're going to Oahu, it seems. Some of them on Kauai and Molokai and Maui, and one made it all the way down to Hawaii. You might note that one took a rather roundabout route and finally ended up back on Kauai or Oahu, that area there. One of the turtles did migrate about 500 miles to the south and west to Johnston Atoll. So this is what we see mostly in terms of our turtles. Females and males will migrate to French frigate shoals, do their thing, and then migrate back to their forage grounds. So let's look at the life cycle a little bit. Here's an adult female on the left, an adult male on the right. We'll come back to how they get to that size and how long it takes in a moment. So every 2 to 4 years, maybe a female will migrate up to Lalo, French frigate shoals. And once up there, there will be males up there and she will mate and probably lay an average of 3 to 4 clutches of eggs of about 100 to 110 eggs at 2 weeks intervals. In between laying of clutches, she will be out offshore developing a new clutch of eggs, and she will come ashore at night generally and lay her clutch after digging a nest and depositing the eggs and then covering it up. The eggs will incubate for 45 to 75 days before synchronous hatching occurs. And this is important because without the work of the entire clutch together, they will not be able to dig their way out. So if you get left behind, you're late in hatching, you might be left behind forever. At any rate, this ball of hatchlings dig their way to the surface and emerge at night and crawl into the ocean. There they undergo a swimming frenzy, and the juveniles will spend 3 to 7 years out in the pelagic realm, the open ocean, feeding on zooplankton out there. They feed on fish eggs, they feed on jellyfish, Portuguese man o' war, box jellies, whatever they can find out there. And when they reach a size of about 35 to 40 centimeters, 3 to 7 years later, they will migrate to an inshore habitat where they become benthic algae and seagrass feeders. They become herbivores. So they're about 40 centimeters in length, carapace length at that time. And they are going to then spend some time in the areas around the main Hawaiian Islands, mostly in shallow waters, feeding on seagrass, doing their thing, growing, and reaching a size of 80 to 85 centimeters before they will become mature males and females. Now, modeling seems to indicate that this takes 20 to 30 years, although some of the work that we have done that talks about or looks at the growth rate will indicate that it may take 40 to 50 years for them to reach maturity. But we're not absolutely certain about this at any rate. I see there's some questions coming up, but I don't know exactly how to go about that. Dr. Berg, did you have a question? Well, I don't know that I can answer them now, perhaps later. So we see the life cycle of the Honu. We see what happens. They live and grow mostly in the main Hawaiian Islands and migrate to Lalo. And the Marine Turtle Biology and Assessment Program, formerly known as the Marine Turtle Research Program, has been monitoring the nesting activity at French Frigate Shoals since 1973. And that is the time that George was celebrating 49 years. If you look at this graph of the nesting population, it was presented by Mary Lou Stamen at a presentation, at Hawaii Pacific University a few weeks back. And I will post the URL if you want to watch her entire presentation, because it was pretty interesting as she looked at some of the changing habitat and other problems associated with French Frigate Shoals and the main Honu nesting site. Okay, if you look at this graph, you'll see that the general trend is up and that the annual growth rate calculated by the MTBAP is about 3% or 3.2% annually. There are some issues with habitat degradation and changing of nesting sites that they're looking at, but for now, things still look to be okay. So we just looked at the Honu, or the green turtle, and it is by far the most common of the inshore turtles that we see here in Hawaii. The hawksbill turtle, or Honu ea, is relatively rare and probably only represents about 1% as abundant as our Honu. Most of the Hawaiian hawksbill population spend their entire lives in the Hawaiian archipelago, just like the Hawaiian Honu. Genetic studies, Gauss et al., indicate that Hawaii may have served as a stepping stone to the Eastern Pacific habitat where Eastern Pacific hawksbill turtles reside. Now, nesting for most of the Hawaii hawksbill turtles occurs on the main Hawaiian Islands. And if you take a look here at our management units, you will see that, again, the Hawaiian Islands are an isolated regional management unit or distinct population segment. So they're in our islands for their entire life. So the main nesting areas in Hawaii, since they nest in Hawaii mainly, are mainly on the main islands. We see that there are some possible nesting sites or probable here on Kauai and some sites on Oahu. Occasional nesting here where the triangles are. But the main nesting sites are on the southwest shore of Hawaii Island, maybe a little bit of nesting in Waipio Valley on the northeast side of Hawaii Island, in Kihei area on Maui, and on the northwest shore of Molokai. So here's what we see in terms of the population as it stands now. Hawaii Island that is those major nesting sites, they've tagged about 171 females over the years, and the average is about 10 to 25 females nesting per year, with 30 to 50 nests documented each year. On Maui, I think they've tagged somewhere around 11 females. Somebody may have more up-to-date information on that, with only a few nests each year. On Molokai, some recent discoveries by Alex Gauss found more than 40 nests in the Halava Valley area, but we don't know how many nesting females there are in that particular group. So the reproductive migrations of hawksbills are a little bit different from those of the Honu or green turtle. Parker et al. Put together all of the migratory paths that were studied by satellite tagging, and I'll follow a few here just to give you an idea. Hawksbill turtles tagged in the Kamihami area traveled up and around to the Hamakua coast here on the Big Island, not very far. They're not traveling hundreds of miles. Same thing here, another one traveling up to the west, to the east and around to Hamakua coast. One made a trip along the west coast of the Big Island, crossed the Alinuihaha Channel, and took up residence off Kahului, Maui. Here's another one swinging around and ending up in the Hamakua coast area. Now, this is another turtle tagged on, or a turtle tagged on in the Kihei area of Maui, traveling across the Alinuihaha Channel, sort of in a reverse direction, ending up in the Hamakua coast area. Same thing over here, traveling across, ending up at the Hamakua coast. And another one, same thing. Hamakua coast seems to be a hotbed for foraging areas, adult hawksbill turtles. Here's one that was tagged on Maui, ended up on the northeast coast of Molokai, the north coast, and one on Kihei that finally ended up on Oahu. So you see they take relatively shorter paths from between their forage grounds and their nesting grounds. So the Honu ea or hawksbill are listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. And one of the interesting things about the hawksbill is that there are a lot of groups that are working to help the hawksbill turtles recover their population or their population to grow. Right now, there is some positive growth in the nesting population, but they are so few in the population that they are very, very tenuous and are still and will be listed as endangered for quite some time. So some of the current threats that are facing our Honu and Honu ea: climate change. So climate change causes an increase in the temperature of the beaches and nesting areas where turtles lay their eggs. Increased nesting nest temperatures can cause a slide or change in the gender of the turtles, because turtles become girls when the temperature is high, above a pivotal temperature, and they become males when the temperature is below a pivotal temperature. If the temperature is too high, you might have a gender switch where you have more females in the population. On the right is something that Mary Lou referred to in her presentation, where on the top you see French frigate shoals, East Island, where most of the nesting used to take place. And Hurricane Walaka came through in October of 2018, and this is what it looked like after Walaka passed through. They lost their major nesting site in 2018. It is slowly coming back, but basically you will see that they have had to shift their nesting to another island, which causes some problems. And Mary Lou went over that in her presentation. Recreational fishing interactions. All of us in the stranding business find that fishing interactions, fishing line, hooks, that sort of thing, is the majority of the issues that we find when we go to work with injured or stranded turtles. Here's a couple that show the garroting of a flipper by fishing line and entanglement on the right. We also find that some turtles will, this is a juvenile hawksbill, will swallow baited hooks. And this one, you could see that the baited hook is lodged down in the esophageal area. And in fact, this one was unable to be saved by the veterinarians at the NOAA facility. They tried their best, but could not. Another one, of course, is marine debris, plastics. We all know about plastics and their harmful effects. They're out there. Turtles do tend to ingest them from time to time. And of course, they get entangled in plastic debris out in the ocean from time to time. Direct human interactions with turtles. Our Honu and Honuea live in shallow waters. They come up to the surface to breathe, and they can be hit by boats. Propeller slashes are often lethal and are obviously very damaging to the animal. As more and more tourists come around and join us on the beach, they are also joining the basking sea turtles that come out to rest. Everyone likes to have their picture taken with a turtle. In some cases, they are benign interactions, but others, they cause turtles to react and move back into the water, which is a bad thing. Coastal development, pollution. We know that more and more people bring more and more sunscreen, sewage, agricultural runoff, physical damage to the reefs. There's nothing that we can do about it except be cognizant of what we're doing. Be careful out there and try to do as little damage as possible. This affects turtles as well as other wildlife in our waters. Okay, so the Hawaiian Honu and Honuea are constantly on our minds, and there are many groups working to ensure their survival and population recovery. However, sea turtles in general are distributed worldwide and very often are in international waters, living in one country's waters and migrating to nest on beaches in another country. During the migration, they may pass through the waters of several different countries, and this creates problems, making management and conservation much more difficult and requires international cooperation, something that's not always easy to make happen. So let's take a look at the distribution of sea turtles in the Pacific. I mentioned there were 5 species, and I've showed you this particular regional management unit map of green turtles. You can see groups of turtles. They do scan and interact, expand and interact in different regional management units, but let's look at the hawksbill turtle. These regional management units span really the entire ocean. Here is the leatherback turtle, which is a far greater pelagic traveler than any of the other species, covers most of the world's oceans. The olive ridley also transcends or goes across entire oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, into the Indian Ocean, covering huge areas. The loggerhead turtle, the North Pacific, South Pacific, North Atlantic, cover the entire ocean from the East Coast to the West Coast, North America to Asia, East Coast of the United States to the West Coast of Africa and Europe, and so on. Huge distances. So the North Pacific loggerhead is one I would like to look at because it is in our Pacific Ocean and it actually encompasses some of the Hawaiian Islands. The loggerhead sea turtle is a DPS, or distinct population segment, a regional management unit, and we just looked at it. And I want to harken back to 1996 and 7, when Wallace Nichols and his team satellite tagged a sea turtle in Baja California. This was a loggerhead they named Adelita. And lo and behold, Adelita took a 368-day migration across the Pacific Ocean, passing by the northern main Hawaiian Islands, ending up in Japan. This links the west coast, the west coast of North America, Baja, Southern California, and Japan. And we now know that this, again, is a distinct population unit. They are genetically very closely related. And we now know that the nesting sites for almost all of the North Pacific Regional Management Unit of loggerheads is in the southern Japanese islands. So the question was, where do they go? Once they leave or are hatched on the Japanese islands, where do they go? How do they get to South America, to Baja California? So the idea was to satellite tag some loggerhead turtles. The problem, of course, is where do you find juvenile loggerhead turtles that can carry a satellite tag? And again, I mentioned the name George Balaz, who worked in cooperation with Itaru Uchida, the director of the Port of Nagoya Public Aquarium, and said, hey, can you raise some loggerhead turtles up to about 35, 40 centimeters that can carry satellite tags? And the Port of Nagoya Public Aquarium had captive adult turtles that did lay eggs, and they did have hatchlings that they could raise. So they raised over a period of years quite a number of northern loggerhead turtles that Hawaii Preparatory Academy students participated in the tagging of those turtles with George Balaz. And here's a picture of our students. Laura Jim, our co-director of the program, myself, and George in the background there. And we managed to put out over 231 satellite tags on loggerhead turtles over a period of about 10 years. Actually, it's a little longer than that. But the question then was, we have all these turtles tagged at the Port of Nagoya Public Aquarium, and how are we going to get them out into the Pacific Ocean where they should be? We note that the North Pacific Gyre is here, and you have a north equatorial current and a huge current, the Kuroshio, which is akin to the Gulf Stream on the east coast of the United States, travels up here, and we know somehow turtles get over to here. But what were they doing here and in between here? So George, again, and the colleagues we paired with used their ingenuity and worked with ships of opportunity. There were container ships. There were fisheries training vessels from Japan. There were ships that traveled from Tokyo to Sendai, ferry ships. And there was even a tourist ship or a boat that took out whale watching tours. So we would load turtles onto these ships, go with them, and release them at certain places out in the Kuroshio Current or further along in the North Pacific, north of Hawaii. Here is a picture of one release, three little turtles right there being released from this whale watching boat out in the Kuroshio Current. So what did we find? Well, here is the spaghetti strands of 231 tracks of loggerhead turtles that were satellite tagged and released out into the Pacific, some off of the main Japanese islands right in the Kuroshio Current, some more over here in the bifurcation area of the Kuroshio Current. And what they found basically was these turtles didn't just float along with the current. They moved around in eddies here and remained in this general area by and large, where they were feeding on plankton, zooplankton, and so on. We do see that there are a few that made it all the way over. I think there were 6 out of the 231 that made it all the way over to the west coast of the Americas, particularly in Baja California area. One came down a little close to Hawaii, but most of them were a little bit north of here. Okay. So that's one situation where we found that turtles live out in the loggerhead turtles live out in the open ocean. And so if we look at their life cycle, we see it's a kind of complex one. We see that eggs are laid on the beaches in Japan. The hatchlings swim out into the Kuroshio Current and take up oceanic foraging out there. And there is a segment of this population that remain out in the oceanic environment, living there, maybe even up to their adult stage. There's another segment that may be traveling to the East Pacific, over into Baja, over into that area where they forage in neritic or shallow water grounds, feeding on plankton over there, crabs, crustaceans on the floor of the ocean, and plankton and so on. Both of these groups, the oceanic foraging and the neritic foraging group, will travel back to the nesting beaches, as Adelita did from Baja California, and as others do that take up neritic foraging along the along the Japanese coast in the North Pacific. So this is sort of a complex life cycle. And if we go back, you'll note that this area here is a region of high productivity where turtles are out there feeding, where there's a lot of food. And this is also an area where longline fisheries take place, causing a lot of bycatch of loggerhead turtles. Their population has been declining in the North Pacific for sure. Well, what about the South Pacific? You saw the distinct population segment down there. And here again, George created this relationship with Richard Farman, who is the director of the Aquarium of the Lagoons in New Caledonia, which did a similar thing. He was able to obtain some hatchlings, and this particular group of loggerhead turtles nest primarily in Australia and New Caledonia. He was able to gather hatchlings at his aquarium. Here are some of our students and Laura Jim, one of the directors of the program at HPA. And this is a picture of the port of the Noumea, New Caledonia aquarium. A small aquarium, but very, very nice aquarium, very well managed and maintained. Richard was able to raise loggerhead turtles to about 35, 40 centimeters, where they could take and handle satellite tags. Here is our team of students in the 2008 deployment, logging 44 satellite tags that we're going to deployed on these turtles. And volunteers from the the Noumea Aquarium helped to attach the satellite tags. And here we have one of the 44 that were put out in 2008. And there were 44 more put out in 2012. Again, here's the team from the 2012. Again, we had to be creative, and Richard was able to contact the French Navy, and they were willing to take Richard and George on board with the turtles to deploy this particular group in 2008 between New Caledonia and New Zealand, where they were deployed from the side of the boat by the crew on board, left out there, and the tracks were then charted, and here's what they look like. You'll see both the North Pacific that I was showing you earlier here, and this is the South Pacific. Some tags were put on over in the Peru and North Chile area. You'll see some over there. We did not get crossing all the way over like we might have suspected, but we only put out 88 tags here, and they were only deployed right here. Some of them were moving across, and it is reasonable to believe that they may indeed, and probably will travel all the way across the South Pacific to the coast of Peru and Chile. Okay, so that is the loggerhead situation in the North and South Pacific. Let's look at the hawksbill situation. They are listed as critically endangered in almost all areas of the world, including Hawaii. And here again, I show you the distinct population segments of the hawksbill. We have this one in Hawaii that is right in here, distinct population segment. And we are working, I'll go back one here. We are working down in this group now with the Southwest Pacific regional population here, down here. And I want to show you a couple of satellite tracks tagging programs. One is from the Solomon Islands, done by Hamilton and his group. The Arnavan Islands in the Solomons tracked a group of hawksbill turtles from the Solomon Islands. And you see that the majority of them ended up in or on the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, a few in Papua New Guinea and a few in the southern part of Papua New Guinea over there. One traveled down to New Caledonia, passing through the waters of Vanuatu. So they're traveling long distances and living in areas that are very different from their nesting grounds. Here is some work that we did in 2018, 19, and 20. That's the Hawaii Preparatory Academy and the Republic of Vanuatu, tagging turtles, hawksbill turtles on Moso Island. The international travel of these turtles is quite amazing and similar to what you saw for the Solomon Islands. Turtles that were tagged on Moso Island over here traveled to the west towards the Great Barrier Reef. This turtle, Lucy, traveled 2,200 kilometers and ended up in the Great Barrier Reef. Pansico and Teslaba, 1,700 and 2,000 kilometers, and were headed for the Great Barrier Reef before their satellite tags stopped transmitting. Okay, so there were a total of 7 tags put out. 3 of them went to the Great Barrier Reef, and 4 of them traveled closer distances. 3 of them went to New Caledonia, Ethanapualilia, and Laumakala, and they are residing in the waters of New Caledonia. And 1 of them traveled to the southernmost island of the Republic of Vanuatu. These are only distances of about 500 kilometers, taking from 12 to 20 days to travel. So we see by looking at the northern loggerhead and the southern loggerhead regional management unit that, and the hawksbills, that this is one big ocean and that our sea turtles often use most or all of it. So let's take a look again at those threats that I mentioned earlier. We have climate change, more severe weather events, higher incubation temperatures resulting in feminization of the population and possibly reduced incubation success or death. Erosion, loss of nesting habitat, coral reef degradation, bleaching events, pollution, overuse from tourism and fishing pressures, pollution from heavy metals, pesticides, sunscreen, etc. Marine debris, pollutants, plastic, heavy metals, pesticides, etc. Invasive species, the rat, mongoose, cats, dogs, pigs, etc. in nesting areas where they dig up the nest and consume the eggs. And finally, in those that are traveling the one big ocean, we have many more human interactions. We talked about boat strikes and fishing entanglement, but now if we travel to other parts of the world where these turtles do, we see that hunting, egg collecting, tortoiseshell collecting, and international trade and fisheries bycatch become much more important for the survival of this species throughout the world. So it's one big ocean, one big earth, and I want you to consider things we might be able to do to alleviate some of the problems that we are causing. Use your voice. We are really the first generation to know that we are destroying this earth, changing the climate. Be informed. Know what's going on. It's not always easy these days. Be political. Exercise your right to vote. Your elected officials are the ones who must change our behavior on a large scale. Travel responsibly. Try and cut back on your travel. Reduce your consumption of fossil fuels. Stay closer to home. Do those sorts of things to try and reduce. These are things that we can do. Eat sustainably. Reduce your meat intake. Reduce and consume less meat. That is one of the primary producers of carbon footprint or carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the raising of animals for consumption. Reduce your waste. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. Watch what you buy. Try and shop responsibly. Make sure you're buying products that are produced or gathered sustainably. Find ways to donate and support meaningful projects. The only way that we can keep doing our research or people keep supporting the environment is through your support. Get out there and do it and volunteer to help. Cleanup days, volunteering for the hawksbill program to monitor, volunteering to monitor monk seals on the beach, that sort of thing. You can do that. We can't change always the big picture, but we can do little things to make our world better and the environment last longer. I end to one slide. Ending here is the sunset on Tern Island at French Frigate Shoals. And I leave you with this saying before I go to my acknowledgements, and that is, we did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. What we do to the web, we do to ourselves. And this was from a Native American, Chief Seattle, letter to the president in the late 1800s. As a finish or completion here of this program, I would like to again thank George Balaz for all of his mentorship and constant support over the years, to the NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, Marine Turtle Biology and Assessment Program for their support, to our HPA programs, and to Phyllis Kanikuni for her unwavering championing of our program and of literacy in Hawaii. And finally, to HPA and all the other groups and individuals who support and participate in environmental stewardship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc, for that very informative presentation. We do have some time for a few questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can. We apologize in advance if we run out of time before answering your question. So the first question, Marc, is what is the oldest sea turtle you've tagged?
Mary Lou said that in there. I think there was one that was maybe 65 or 70 years old. Is the oldest. We have a number of them that are in their 40s, early 40s that we've tagged here. Some of them are nearly 40 years old that have not even reached sexual maturity yet.
Thank you. How long do tracking devices stay on?
That's variable. It depends on the tracking device, but of course there's a variability from it never transmits to over 1,000 days. Our most recent tracking of satellite tags on the hawksbill turtles, their iridium tags from Telonix, they last about 2 years. The company says they would only last about 1 year.
What is the recommended distance to stay away from turtles?
That's a very difficult one because most people say, oh, you've got to stay away 20, 30, 40 feet. The reality is 10 feet or so is good usually. In the case of Hawaiian turtles, they're very used to people in most places. And as long as you don't cause them to react to your presence, you're doing okay. If you go to Laniakea, for example, you'll see that they put the red cable to keep you back somewhere around 10 feet away from the turtle.
Where do turtles rest on the Big Island's east side, as there are not many places to come ashore?
Good question. They probably don't bask that much there. Prior to the beginning of basking on Hawaii Islands, which was really began in the 90s for the main islands, it was happening earlier at French Frigate Shoals, but they probably simply sleep underwater we've had turtles and have turtles here on the leeward side that will go down and sleep for 45 minutes to an hour, lodged under a cave, underwater, and do just fine.
Is it possible for one species of turtle to mate with another?
There are hybrids that do occur in the wild. And of course, if you keep them together in an aquarium situation, I know that there were, I think it was loggerhead, hawksbill hybrids at the Port of Nagoya Aquarium. Others might be know of more, yeah. I know George and our friends from Canada that lived on Maui, the Bennetts, have actually observed a hybrid hawksbill in their waters off Maui.
Does the virus that causes cysts still exist in Hawaii?
Fibropapillomatosis does exist in Hawaii. It is much less common now than it used to be, and it has probably gone the way of most viral diseases in the sense that there was a few infections climbing to a crescendo of many infections, maybe 50% of the population in some areas, and now it has declined to maybe 10 or 12% in many areas. So it's gone the way of most or many viral infections.
Why does Hawaii Island have so many nesting sites? Is it because the environment is more suitable for laying eggs?
I don't know the answer to that. I just know that this is nesting sites only for the hawksbill. Seems to be a popular place there. Maybe the environment is particularly good, but I don't know the answer as why.
Do you have any information on what the male to female ratio is for turtles in Hawaii today?
That's a good question. I believe it was somewhere on the order of only, usually in the past, only on the order of maybe a little more female than male. However, we are engaged in a project with the Marine Turtle Biology and program at NOAA to assess the sex ratio of turtles in our waters right now. And that involves taking blood samples and doing hormone analysis to find out how many males and females we have. We don't really know yet. We do know that in Australia, the sex ratio has become skewed very much in the direction of females.
We have time for this last question. Is there a turtle hotline that people can call if they see a turtle in distress?
There is indeed. The Marine Turtle Biology and Assessment Program has a series of different stranding operators on all of the islands. And if you go to the NOAA website and look for the stranding hotline information there, it will tell you where to call on each island. In Hawaii, on the leeward side, it's the Hawaii Preparatory Academy. We go down and respond to those. There are people on the Kona side that respond, as well as the windward side in Hilo that respond also. I will put in, I might mention, I'll put in Mary Lou Stammen's presentation URL so that you could see it down there. Let's see if I can put it in the chat so that you can take a look at it if you want to.
Great. Thank you again, Marc, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And for those of you who were asking, yes, there will be a recording available of this presentation that we will be sending out in about a week after today's program. You'll receive an email with a link to the recording. Our next virtual program is a special book reading and talk story with Kaipo Pomaikai at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Saturday, June 18th. Uncle Kaipo will read the story of a Hawaiian tugboat captain, a book that's inspired by his life. You'll find the registration link in the chat. And please be sure to sign up for this year's Oceans of Possibilities Summer Reading Challenge. For more information and registration, again, please refer to the link in the chat. This concludes our program. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Take care and happy reading. Aloha.